Hello and welcome back to Chat About It, Don't Chat About It with me, Rachel, the Queen of the Woke, as crowned by one of my haters. Don't forget to subscribe. Around 95% of you who are my returning viewers don't actually subscribe to the channel, so it would be great if you could actually do that. It will help me out a lot. Thank you. I've got a goal of 1,300 subscribers. Can I do it by Christmas? Who knows? You may have noticed the setup is a little bit different. That is because I am changing over my setup to a new one. It's going to take a few months, so just bear with me. But I thought, why not start on my new camera? Today is Doctor Who Sunday, which means that it is our one video a week where we take a break from the craziness that's going on in the world and just talk about Doctor Who. Don't worry, we'll be back to chaos tomorrow, and believe me, I think this one's a good one for tomorrow. You voted for Dalek, which is a Christopher Eccleston story. To vote on the current poll, head on over to the community page, but not until you've actually watched this video first. Dalek was written by Robert Sherman, directed by Joe Ahern, and it aired to 8.6 million people, so it was actually very well received. The Doctor and Rose land in a bunker in Utah after receiving a distress signal. They discover old relics and past enemies of the Doctor. They meet Henry Van Statten, who is in charge of the base. The Doctor has an instant distaste for Statten and is suspicious of what is going on. Statten, believing he is some sort of hero instead of the arrogant snot that he actually is, shows the Doctor the pride of his collection, a Dalek, a deadly creature that has escaped the Time War. Can the Doctor defeat this one Dalek? Now, did you know that this story is actually based off another Doctor Who story? If you were only familiar with New Who, you may have not have actually listened to anything from the Big Finish audio productions, their audio plays. Well, this one is actually based off Jubilee, which is also written by Robert Sherman as well. Jubilee is written for the Sixth Doctor and Evelyn Smythe. It's probably one of their best stories. So Jubilee was just the base story for Dalek. Not everything that you actually see in Dalek happens in Jubilee. But I think it was a good way of actually reintroducing the Daleks into Doctor Who, particularly for new viewers. Dalek is really quite a strange one for me. There's a certain kind of sadness and pitifulness around it, and actually that happens in Jubilee as well. Now, does that actually sound odd to you? It feels odd saying it because we know who the Daleks are, we know who the creator is, and we know how dangerous they can actually be. And in this story, we are also shown how dangerous the Doctor can be. Make sure that you actually stick around to find out why I think this story has sadness and pitifulness in it. There's also pain as well, actually, which is something that you would actually expect if you were the last of your kind too, and in this case of the Doctor and the Dalek, they both are. This story suits Christopher Eccleston, and I don't think this would have suited any other Doctor other than Capaldi, and of course, naturally, the Sixth Doctor. Good old Sixth Doctor, you know, he's my favourite. Tennant would be too zany, as would Smith's Doctor. Whittaker's Doctor, for those who see her as the Doctor, wouldn't have an answer, and Gatwa's Doctor would cry and forget about Rose. One of the Doctor's best lines in this episode was at the beginning, where he sees the Cyberman helmet and he says, "An old friend of mine. Enemy. The stuff of nightmares reduced to an exhibit. I'm getting old." It's the way he says it. You really get the feeling of that statement being very true, even more so for a child who actually thinks that anyone over the age of 20 years old is incredibly ancient. But with the delivery of that line, you can see it in his eyes as well. Eccleston in this episode alone actually delivers one of his best performances of the entire series. The script is strong anyway, so that obviously really helps him. But words are just words on a page until an actor actually brings them to life. And the better the story, the better the performance. That's what I think anyway. That scene though where he meets the Dalek, I can imagine that would actually instill a sheer terror on children and teenagers. At this point, they wouldn't have seen the Doctor like this. At first, truly terrified, but then almost manic when he realizes that the Dalek is not armed. Much like how it is in the audio play. This is why I say that this story is actually the better choice for this particular Doctor. Very alien, older and experienced. I remember the Sixth Doctor trying to throttle Perry, and I remember being absolutely terrified, but he's still my favourite. The Ninth Doctor is so intent on actually destroying the Dalek that he ends up getting interrupted by man's arrogance. And yes, it is man's arrogance, but I actually think it is a good idea that we don't get to see the Doctor being that reckless. And I'm saying reckless, absolutely, because one false move and he could have easily regenerated that Dalek. But not only that, what would that meant for new viewers seeing their hero do something like that to something that is defenseless? And it is actually weird saying that about the Dalek, but Sherman actually made the Dalek defenseless, so you can't actually help but feel sorry for it in some way. Now, it wouldn't have exactly been a fair fight ground, although having said that, when the Dalek regenerated, it wasn't a fair fight ground anyway, so it's irrelevant, actually, that comment. Now, can I ask you a question? What did you actually think of the episode title, Dalek? Now, the original story was called Jubilee. Obviously, there's pictures of the actual disc floating around out there, but if you don't actually see the pictures, then you won't actually be aware that this was a Dalek story per se. Dalek could have actually had a different episode title and have gotten away with it quite easily. Now, I don't know what name exactly I would have actually given the story, but I'm just saying it could have done. There's this common trait, and it dates back to Classic Who, where they actually announced the enemy within the title itself, so you actually know what you're going to get rather than being totally surprised. The only thing is, you just don't know when in the episode you're going to get it. Classic Who fans obviously know what a Dalek is, but new Who fans may know what a Dalek is just from seeing bits and pieces from around the shops. Now, I'm not surprised this story was commissioned for New Who. It makes sense as it's very reflective of Classic Who. The first ever series of Doctor Who had the Daleks in it after all. I'm glad that they actually kept the reveal of all the Daleks returning absolutely 100% stum. They put the seed in nice and early, and I think they did that on purpose. Classic Who would have had a fully fledged Dalek empire, so to speak, when people were watching it back in the 60s. So I sometimes actually thought maybe that was too much. Maybe one Dalek alone would have actually been enough. Now, side question, what did you all actually think of the redesign of the Dalek? Particularly Classic Who fans, I'm interested to know. I thought it was okay. It's not the worst I've ever seen. Introducing one Dalek was a great idea. It shows the level of the threat that one Dalek would have. From its flying abilities to its extermination abilities, it shows you the sheer terror and danger that these Daleks can impose on people. But that doesn't actually happen until Sherman actually makes you feel pity for it and feel the sadness that it's feeling. This also happens in Jubilee, but I actually think it translates onto the screen really well. Out of all the Doctor Who audio plays, Jubilee was always one that I said could actually really be put onto the screen and you can actually do it. The whole scene between the Doctor and the Dalek is designed to instill fear, pity and sadness. The Doctor has the three of them, and obviously pain as well, and the Dalek in this case is unusually sad and pitiful. The fear doesn't actually come until much later. The words and the performances from both Christopher Eccleston and Nicholas Briggs make this scene the highlight of the episode. You get a real sense of loneliness from both the Dalek and the Doctor. You can't help but feel pity. They play it with a certain type of sadness. As vengeful as the Dalek actually is, he is just waiting for orders. Even when the scene happens between Rose and the Dalek, much like the scene between Evelyn and the Dalek in the audio play, you get the loneliness, and they both act the way the audience is feeling towards the Dalek. They pity it, touch it, and it gets regenerated. Every move that the Dalek does in order to be set free from its prison is all done with sadness and pity. One of the most stellar bits is where the Dalek electrocutes all of the soldiers in one go on the screen so the Doctor could see it. Again, it highlights the dangers of a single Dalek in one go, allowing for a double shock when they returned later on in the series. By the way, were you all expecting the Daleks to actually come back? I wasn't. Now, I've called Ncuti's Doctor out in the past for being reckless, so I'm going to do it here as well. Was the Ninth Doctor reckless? I'm interested to know what you think. Now, I do think he was being reckless in this story. There's also a couple of other things that they say in this episode, which is a contention that I have from Rose. They make a point that Rose is 19. He whisked her off to travel, and then he's in a mess where she believes now that she may have actually died. Now, his thoughts are actually completely invested in Rose, whereas Ncuti's Doctor will be like going off and perhaps snogging some random dude that he's just actually met. And the Ninth Doctor has to actually choose between a Dalek or his companion. And that is a very terrible decision to make, and you can actually see it in his face. You all know Rose is not my favourite companion, but she is really good in this episode. She actually shines quite a fair bit. in this episode the equivalent to Evelyn. Now, Evelyn is a companion from the audio plays that is actually much older. Probably the oldest we've had. Sherman obviously can't put the traits of an older woman into a 19-year-old girl, but he takes the fundamentals that were required for this episode alone. Evelyn has a knack of actually keeping the Doctor very level-headed, and this is what Rose does in this story. We see the Ninth Doctor actually being reckless in this story, so much so that we actually see him holding a gun. The Doctor, the alien who doesn't do that, is suddenly holding one, not clearly thinking whatsoever. His head is still in the state of Rose is in immediate danger. Now, I like how Billy delivers her line to Christopher Eccleston. There's a sense of authority in it, and like, why are you being an idiot right now? And it's enough to actually stop him in his tracks. There's this suggestion throughout the episode that someone also needs to stop the Doctor, slow him down, think clearly. From the line of "you would make a good Dalek," which is actually a very scary line, to the stop and look stance that we had from Rose. I do believe that the Doctor always needs a companion in order to get him to do this. So we get to see the actual Dalek, as ugly as ever, but it looks old and pitiful this time. Again, we see the sadness. I guess this would make the Daleks even more terrifying when they came back later in the series. Overall, this is a great reintroduction to the Daleks in Doctor Who. What did you actually think of the episode? Of course, I've missed lots out, so be sure that you actually leave your comments below, like the video, and give it a really good share. I'll be back with more chaotic woke news tomorrow at 4 p.m, and believe me, I think this one's going to be a good one. Chat about it, don't shout about it, like and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.